Marni. I'm a psychologist with the area of Beit Shemesh. I work for the Sharut Apsychologi, which is the school psychology services, the educational psychology services of Beit Shemesh. You work in all of the schools in Beit Shemesh where your children are attending, and if your children ever need help in terms of therapy or an evaluation, meetings with the staff of the school to help your children adjust, we're here to help you. So please, if you need to find the school psychologist of your school, the secretary or the yoetza will know who they are, and they'll be happy to help you as it's relevant. I recognize some of the names here because I have a son in school in first grade, and I see a couple of his classmates' parents here, so thank you for joining. Can you all hear me? Can someone indicate if you can hear me? Hold on. You're all on mute, but I just want to know if can someone just let me know if I'm audible, if you can hear me? Yes, thank you.
We can hear you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to let you know that this is being recorded, so that if any of your friends aren't available to attend, they could watch it. We have a Sharut Apsychologi Facebook page, and this is going to be put on the Sharut Apsychologi Facebook page. Which also means that if you ask a question, I was looking to see if I could somehow pause the recording, but I don't really know how to do that. I'm not that adept with Zoom. So if you ask a question, I hope you don't mind that it will be on the video, on the Zoom. People will be able to see it later, but hopefully that won't inhibit you from asking questions. Okay, so let's get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, just as a background. So as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm also an Allah. I came with my family in the year 2004, it's hard to believe it's been 16 years. We live in Beit Shemesh. All my kids have attended Avat Yisrael over the years, as I know some of your kids have. So I guess I've been through this as a professional who works here as an Olah myself, so I could share a little bit of my experience over the years. What it's like as an Olah here. I've worked in various schools. I work primarily in Haredi schools, but schools with large Olim populations. So before we made Aliyah, we were the second year of Nefesh B'Nefesh, and they had an application. And they asked for 3 reasons why you want to make Aliyah. And I wrote like there's no one is moving here because of the weather, and no one is moving here because of the economic opportunities, I would assume. And for people generally, the year 2004 was still the Intifada when we came out. The reason people typically move here is ideology. We believe this is the place that we're supposed to be. We're supposed to raise our families. And we all know that there's hardships involved. I hope you knew that before. I assume you figured that out after you got here. Moving to any new place is complicated. Moving from New Jersey to California, relocating is complicated, especially if you have children, and especially if you're moving to a country where they speak a different language and there's a different culture, and especially in the middle of a pandemic. So it just makes things more complicated. So I always thought that was so funny, that question, like, why are you moving to Israel? We're moving here because we believe, most of us had this dream for many, many years that this is where we should be. And Baruch Hashem, I could say after 16 years, I haven't looked back, I haven't regretted it for a second. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to have its challenges. So my point today is to give you some ideas, some experiences, and hopefully that will help hopefully I'll be able to help you a little bit with the adjustment process. Okay, I don't know what it was like when you guys came. When we came, there was this whole big thing at the airport, Nefesh B'Nefesh. People met us, and there were balloons, and there were dignitaries and politicians, and it felt like we were these big heroes. And a lot of us, when we left our communities in America, we had these people made a goodbye thing for us. And we felt like we were amazing people that were living the dream. We made Aliyah. Then you get here, and very quickly, you go to the Kupat Cholim the first day to sign up, and you don't understand the forms. No one is very patient with you. And all of a sudden, you feel very dejected. It's like you go from that extreme high of moving here to all of a sudden feeling like you go to the hardware store and you want a broom, and you actually have no idea how to say broom because it just isn't in the Torah, and it didn't come up when you were in elementary school. Just basic things take you from that high of the ideology and being here and finally living the dream to the day-to-day basis. And you feel incompetent and you feel humble. And I feel that a lot. Even though you could all have advanced degrees, it doesn't matter when you go to the store and the clerk makes you feel like you're an idiot because you don't know how to say a word. It doesn't make you feel good. And part of just being here is getting through that experience. In some couples, one spouse wanted to come more than the other. In some cases, it was mutual, and both of you met in Bnei Akiva and you always wanted to come, but it's not always like that. In some cases, one spouse is much more motivated and the other one agrees. But sometimes that spouse who really wanted to come isn't necessarily able to recognize the difficulty that the other spouse is feeling, especially, I don't want to say anything male versus female, but especially if it's the spouse that has a primary responsibility for working in Israel and dealing with the kids in school. They're the ones that wanted to come less, and they're the ones that have to deal with the day-to-day complications. It's not always an easy situation. So just be aware that, if you're the one that's like, I'm giving the Zoom from my bedroom, and I'm looking out my window, and I'm looking at the mountains of Beit Shemesh from my bedroom. And if your spouse comes home and says, oh my gosh, I had a terrible experience today. The kid missed the bus. I didn't understand what the word sargel meant. So I threw in a paper clip instead. And then the kid got in trouble, whatever. And then your spouse is like, oh no, but look at the beautiful mountains. It doesn't help. You need to be sort of on the same page and to realize that, yes, we have the ideology, but once you're here, you have to be grounded. You have to just deal with the day-to-day realities. And I'm not saying it's not bad once in a while to go to Ein Gedi and to go to the hotel, restrictions permitting, and do all the things that made us want to come in the first place. But once you're here, you have to be very focused on just day-to-day life and be sensitive to the fact that if one spouse is trying to do that and you're kind of talking about these in the clouds, the mountains, it doesn't really help them so much. And if you're both on the same page in terms of the groundedness, it's much better. Okay, probably most of you didn't have an open house in your kids' school because of the coronavirus, but when you have it, or if you've had any interactions with your kids' teachers, it's kind of difficult because you don't always understand what they're talking about. And like I said, most of us have some sort of day school background or seminary, yeshiva background. It's not like we speak no Hebrew, but the Hebrew that we spoke in America is not the Hebrew that they speak here. It's like you don't realize that until you come, but day-to-day life Hebrew is not the Hebrew that you learned when you were doing Parsha Shavua with Nechama Leibowitz. It's just not the same language. Academic Hebrew or Tanakh Hebrew is very different than day-to-day Hebrew. You didn't ask your kids in most cases if they wanted to come. Typically, the parents wanted to come and they schlepped the kids along, right? They weren't given the choice, but what often happens is the kids are the ones with the full onus of living here. Most of us, many of us, live in very Anglo communities. And many of us, I don't, but many of us work still in America or don't work at all. So many of the parents, many of the adults really have very little Hebrew in their day-to-day life. They don't have to deal with adjusting to the new system, the new cultural, the new style of attitude, right? Unless they choose to. Whereas every single child who's here is forced to deal with Israeli society. They're forced to go to school. They're forced to be on the bus. They're forced to deal with people who may be culturally very different. I don't know if you've noticed, if you've heard from your kids who are in school. I know not all your kids are even in school yet, and that's a different issue that we'll get to. Sometimes kids are a little bit more gruff. Sometimes there's a little bit more cursing. Sometimes some of the nuances and the niceties of life in America aren't the same as they are here. So you have to realize that we're the ones that made the decision to come, but the burden of being here and the day-to-day reality is often on our kids and not on us. And that we could still have that ideology and we could make new friends and all that, but in our American bubble, but our kids can't. They're forced to deal with the reality. And that's why I'm here. My goal in this lecture is to emphasize the importance of you being involved in your kids' education and realizing that they can't do this alone, and you can't step back, even though it's not so easy for parents to be involved in their kids' education because we live in Israel and it's in Hebrew. Okay, so and just a couple more things by way of introduction, then I'll get to the core of it. There's this idea of Hebrew. There's a concept of yom, day, like day by day, right? This idea that every day is going to have new challenges, and every day that you get, you're gonna have accomplished that, and then the things you accomplish that day won't be due the next day. And it's realizing this daily balance. And even if your kids have a bad day, you have a bad day, the next day is going to be a new day. And this perspective that this is a journey, and each step is a journey. It's the whole package. This idea of even putting in perspective for your kids, if they had one bad day, and this is not just Aliyah, this is life, put in perspective of a much more broad picture. Okay, so I just want to speak for a minute about the coronavirus specifically. I know that I didn't do, because this is going to be on Facebook, and like I said, I was hoping I'd be able to pause the recording, but I don't know how to do that. So I'm not doing a heck route. I'm not going around, unless someone wants to. If people are willing to introduce themselves, I would be happy to hear who you are and what grades your kids are in and what schools. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and do that, but I don't want to obligate you to do that because it's being recorded, and I don't know if you're comfortable.
I don't mind.
Okay, so no one is jumping forth doing that, but I assume just based on, and if anyone wants to interrupt at any point and say anything about, their kids' school, what grades, that kind of thing. I assume you have kids of various ages. I assume that some of you have kids some of you have kids in elementary school that have gone back to school, Aleph Adalad. Some of you have kids in Kitot Hey Ad Yobet that have not gone back yet. And some of you have kids in all of those, right? Some of you have kids in all the different age categories. But that's typically who makes Aliyah. But many people who make Aliyah have younger children. So at this point, the kids have gone through Kitat Dalet have gone back, and I assume that it's much better for them. I hope that they're in school. I'm sure there are pros and cons, but I'm going to focus for a second on the kids that haven't gone back to school, the ones in Hey Ad Yobet. Just a couple things to look out for. One, I was speaking for Rachel Cohen. I don't know if you've all met her, probably in person. You haven't met her. She's fantastic. She actually lives in my neighborhood right here. I see her a lot. When there used to be shiurim on Shabbos, I used to see her in the shiurim. She's a very nice person, and you're lucky that your kids have her as the head of the Opan. But hopefully you'll get to meet her in person if you haven't done so yet. So she was explaining to me that there's certain neighborhoods or certain blocks where the kids haven't had nearly as difficult of a time socially as on other blocks. If you're on a block where there are a lot of olim, a very welcoming block, then even though there's no school, your kids have been integrated somewhat. They've made friends, they've met other kids. But Rachel was saying, and I imagine that it's true, there's some kids that are living on a block that there aren't kids their age, that they're just feeling kind of anonymous, that they don't feel connected to anyone. And for a couple of weeks, that's okay. But this is dragging on, right? This has been a few months, and there's no, Knesset isn't so adept at making decisions and then making them and not reversing them. So I don't know when they're going to go back, but it's not easy. You just have to understand, you guys maybe are connecting to other adults through Zoom and other things, but whatever you could do, your kids haven't made friends for yet, whatever you could do to encourage that. And even it involves speaking to the teacher. You might not know the teacher, but saying, can you send me the class list so I can see if there are kids who live nearby? Like parents who haven't yet done this, you might need to mediate so that your friends, your kids make new friends in Israel, because if they're still only friends with their kids from America, it doesn't give them a strong feeling of connectedness. We call it shaychut. It's very, very important that your kids feel that as quickly as they can, if they feel connected to being here, so that way they'll be happy that they'll be here. We're going to understand the implications for a lot of things, including language learning. So that's the first thing, is help your kids socially meet kids. Because if they're not in school, it's very hard to do, and they might need some help, and that might involve speaking to the teacher about getting the class list. A lot of schools have Olim representatives. Like I know Avat Yisrael, I know that they have someone who's meant to help with the Olim, so maybe contact them and ask if they have ideas. The other thing is Zoom. A big part of being here and succeeding in school is language learning. It is very difficult to learn language through Zoom. When you talk about learning language, the way to learn language is very much through immersion. And then on Zoom, you don't have immersion. You don't have the same body language. You don't have the same experience as when you're live. So that I expect your kids to learn language at a delay compared to other kids who have been here at the same point in other years. I just think that especially those that aren't in live instruction, it's not at all an ideal way to learn language. So that just keep that in mind. There's a myth to learn Hebrew by Hanukkah. It is not true. Even in the normal circumstance, very few kids learn fluent Hebrew by Hanukkah. Yes, their Hebrew is going to get better than it was when they came in September. But I expect there to be a significant delay in the Hebrew language learning of kids, especially the ones that are still on Zoom, because it's just not the same as being live. And we all know that they're not in class as many hours, and they don't have the interactions on the playground. There's just much the bus. There's much opportunity for them to learn. So those are two things to keep in mind: are the social aspect and the educational, the language learning aspect of not being in live school, and they're significant, and you can't minimize them. Okay. Okay. If anyone has any questions until now, I'm happy to hear. Otherwise, I'll continue. You can do questions at the end, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay. It's so weird not speaking to a live audience. I've probably given this lecture, roughly the same lecture. Rachel has heard it. I see Tammy is also, she's heard it. I've given the lecture for 13, 14 years. I guess things haven't changed that much. I guess I'm here longer, so maybe I just have more experience, but same general idea, but the whole coronavirus affects things. But what I'm going to emphasize with the hope that everyone is going to be going back to school soon is I'm going to helping your kids succeed in school, because that really is the topic. And Bezrat next few weeks, I hope. And school in America, and I'm sure that you figure this out. It's also different now than it is in a usual circumstance. In America, at least when I grew up, I worked in schools. There were two teachers. There was the secular studies teacher and the Jewish studies teacher, and maybe a gym teacher. But those are the teachers that your kids had to know. In Israel, there are many more teachers. Even as early as first grade, your kid could have 9 or 10 different teachers. It's not the case here because of the coronavirus. But if things change and we go back to a regular schedule, they may have science is not going to be taught by the same teacher, and Torah is not taught by the same teachers, which is math. The mechanechet is the main room teacher. That means if you have any issues, you should communicate with her. But there are going to be a lot of other adults interacting with your kids who might not be aware even that they're a they might not be aware of the difficulties your child is having. So just be aware of that there are many teachers who haven't yet touched base with the machanechet. It's important. But she could be your contact person and she could be in communication.
Sarah?
Second thing to keep in mind is that the kids typically, they have lots of books. I guess they also do in America, right? But there's this idea that they don't have the same classes every day. When I was in school, every day we had the exact same classes. Every day in our secular studies, we had English and we had history and we had science, we had math. Here, the schedule is much more complicated because they mix things around a lot more. So there's something called a ma'arechet, which is a schedule. And like I said, it's not optimal, so the teachers haven't even sent them out yet because there's a lot of changes. But if you know what your child's ma'arechet is, then every day you can ensure that they have the books that they need and the supplies that they need in their bag. It's a terrible thing to think, but if a child is sitting in class without a book, they feel very lost. And sometimes the teachers aren't even so kind to them about it and they blame the kid, even though the kid is 7 and it's actually really not their fault. It's our responsibility to read the daf kesher, to know what's going on. But as much as you can avoid them having that discomfort of sitting in class unprepared, it will be ideal. The daf kesher, even if it's in Hebrew, please read it, focus on what it means, because there are always important announcements in there. And the teachers sort of expect the parents to have read it and they blame the kids if the parents haven't. It's not nice. It happens also in America. I worked in a school, an amazing school in New Jersey for 8 years there. It's not that it's different. The teachers have, the child is there in front of them. So they're the ones that see the teacher's disappointment if they don't have what they need. So very important to know your kid's schedule, make sure they have the right supplies, make sure they have all the things in their kalmar, in their, I don't even know how to say it in English anymore, their, say kalmar, their bag with their stuff, their pencil case, I don't know. Make sure they have everything that they need in it, okay? It's very important for you, to, like I said, to be in touch with the teacher. In America, I remember when I was working in the school, teachers were given instruction when the first 2 weeks of school, you have to call every parent in your class. Here, that's not necessarily the case. Here, unless a child is really misbehaving, you may have no idea what's going on. It could be that your child is having a very hard time and you wouldn't know it until the parent-teacher conference. Usually the parent-teacher conference is about the week before Hanukkah, who knows what will be this year. So if you haven't been in touch with your teacher, be in touch. Here, that's another difference. In America, you would never call your kid's teacher. That would be taboo. Now there's WhatsApp and email, so maybe it's different. When I was there, it wasn't as common, but you didn't communicate with your kids' teachers as freely. Here, the teachers want you to call. They really mean it when they say, I'm available after 9. They expect you to call. If you call, they see that you're caring parent. Call them every night. But they want you to be involved. They want you to send emails. I just want to touch base, see how my son or daughter is doing. It's important to be involved. The kids, the parents, the teachers will perceive your kids as being better taken care of if you're involved. And the truth is, they'll probably be more involved with your kids if they see that you yourself are more involved. All right. Like I said, I understand that the language is difficult and the system is different. The way even kids in school, and those of you that have first graders, you saw there are 2 kids that sit at a table. In America, each kid has their own desk. The whole thing is different, right? They actually think that it's much better to have 2 kids sitting at a desk because you don't feel alone. You have your Zoom, you have your partner. In America, teachers, it's kind of distracting, or else in America, you have 4 desks together. There are different ways of clustering seats, but here, it's your child and the kid that they sit next to. Ask your child how they get along with the person they sit next to. If the child is really having a major issue, or if the child isn't kind or isn't able to help them, if they need a translation, maybe ask your teacher if they could think about a seating partner who might be more appropriate. Like I said, you all went to school, I assume, at least through 12th grade. I'm going to speak about the experience of Ethiopians. Because as some of your kids might go to schools that have Ethiopians, and if not, I'm sure you've noticed that there are Ethiopians in Beit Shemesh. When Ethiopians grew up in Ethiopia, maybe not the ones of this generation, but of previous generations, but even some of them now, some of them are not able to write. Some of them are not able to read. Some of them, many of them, didn't go to school like the schools that we're used to, Western schools. Our kids are going to schools that may have some differences in the schools we went to, but inherently the system is the same. Inherently, you're expected to go to school, to learn to read, to learn to write, to do homework, to study for tests. Then you go a big test called Bagrut, called Regents in New York, or called the psychometry, or called the SAT. We understand the concept of school. We understand this idea that you're working hard so you could get into a good college. We get school. We just don't get the nuances of Israeli school, but we get the concept of school. Whereas people from other cultures that aren't Western don't get school. They don't understand that when you get forms, you're supposed to sign them and return them. They don't understand you're supposed to do homework and study for tests with your kids. They might not even be able to. So that as much as you might feel helpless and that you're not able to help your kids, the truth is you completely are. You just have a language barrier and some slight cultural differences. But Sachakol, in some, you all went to school and you know what being a student is and you know what it entails. And that's pretty much what's expected of your kid. Why am I telling you this? Because there's that feeling of incompetence. That it doesn't matter if you have a PhD in physics from Stanford or wherever you're from, right? There's still a feeling of incompetence that you don't know. You don't understand what the sargel and the kalmar and all these different type of machbara. What is that? What is that, right? But bottom line is you went to school and you could figure it out very easily. And you're at a major advantage of the people that didn't have that experience, like unfortunately some of the other Ethiopian Olim who really are much less able to be involved in their kids' school because they didn't experience it themselves. Why am I telling you this? So you feel empowered, so you feel like don't give up. You need to be there to help your kids get through it because it will make a big difference for your kid. There are a lot of things you can help your kids with. So don't just say school's not my department, I can't at this point. You can help your kids with English, certainly. They should be really good at English, right? You can help your kids even with math. Math in Israel is very different. The curriculum is very different than it is in America. Math in Israel is much more verbal, and they have different approaches, and they change the approach every few years. But at the end of the day, math is math, and that I understand there might be words and all. They have a lot more word problems, and it's much more conceptual than at least math was taught when I lived there before 2004. But in general, you could figure out the math concepts and teach them to your kids. Another thing you could do is Torah, right? Even if, you know what, you have a stone chumash, even if you don't understand every word in the Tanakh yourself, you can help your kids do the story. In Hebrew, there's something called hatrama, which means pre-teaching. You can pre-teach your child the stories that they're learning in Sefer Shoftim, that they're learning in Parshat Lech Lecha. You know the stories, and even if you don't, you can read them. And that when a child is sitting in class, think about it from a language perspective. When you're sitting in class and you're in Nolech, say you understand 25% of the words, and a couple months later, maybe you understand 40%, and by the end of the year, maybe you understand 70% of the words. But if you know the story, then if you already have the idea, the plot, so when you're listening to the words, you're sort of superimposing the story with the words that you're hearing, and it helps you learn the language better. And it makes you feel involved in the lesson because you'll pick up part of it, even if you're, like I said, still at the 25% point of fluency your child. If they know what the story is, they're not going to feel lost because they'll be able to mesh what they learned at home with what the teacher is saying, and it'll help them reach their vocabulary. And it will make them not feel lost in school. So if you could do that in Torah and in Navi and English and math, you have 4 subjects that they really don't have to feel lost. That even if they have minimal understanding of the language, they can still be a student. And that's another point that I want to emphasize is that it's very easy to say, you know what, this year doesn't really count. There's this whole idea about my kid is in a lechadash, they should just be happy to come to school. They shouldn't have any expectations. You shouldn't have to do homework. It's very important your kid do some homework because next year he's not going to be a Nola anymore, and you don't want him to have forgotten what it means to be a student. Even if he only does a couple questions on the page, even if he's not able to do everything, it's very important that he does a little, that he does not and feels that he's completely exempt from everything. Because if someone feels that they're completely exempt, eventually they're going to not feel, they're not going to be exempt anymore. And then they're going to have forgotten what it means to be a student. The key is to sort of gradually increase the expectations, and you can sit with them and do your homework. I have a first grade son. I sit with him often when he does his homework, even though he actually speaks Hebrew pretty well, but just this idea that he shouldn't feel lonely sitting there doing his homework and just give up, because even if you don't know every word in the homework, if you can do it together with him in some way, he'll feel like the burden is not all on his shoulders. I remember, I don't know if they even have Ulpan now. Do they have Ulpan for adults at this point? Someone?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's assume that they do have Ulpan for adults. When I made Aliyah, most of my Aliyah group, we went to Ulpan together. It was very important for me to show my children that I was doing my Ulpan homework, even though it was kind of silly because I was so busy and I had a newborn baby, but I wanted my kids to see that when they were sitting doing their homework, I was doing my homework also. Like this idea of we're all, to paraphrase, we're all in this together. The burden is not all on your shoulders. I'm not just going to go to Holy Bagel and drink coffee every morning while you are going to school and working, and I'm going to, it's just not fair. If your kids see that you feel responsible for them succeeding, they will succeed much better, and they'll have a much better relationship with you and resent you a lot less. There are a lot of situations of Olim that it doesn't always go so well with our teenagers because the teenagers feel very disconnected from the parents. And a big part of avoiding that, in my opinion, and I don't think this is the only part of it, but a part of it is if the parents show their child that they're engaged and that they care and that they're there for them through education. When they become teenagers and they're facing other challenges, they'll see that the parents will be there for them also in that domain. And there's this issue of a hierarchy. You're still the parent, they're still the child. And even though their heed might be better than yours within the next 6 months, it's important for them to feel that you are powerful in terms of their education and you know what you're talking about. And yes, you might not know a word and you look it up and you can laugh it off, but at the end of the day, you can't reverse the hierarchy. I've been to parent-teacher conferences as you know, or meetings as a psychologist where people have brought the older siblings to translate. I really don't think that's a very good idea because the older sibling isn't meant to feel that he's like on top of the parents in terms of his knowledge. Bring a neighbor if you need to, or most schools someone speaks English. And I'll tell you, the majority of psychologists in the Sheret Psychology speak English on a very high level, and many of them are actually native English speakers. But the idea is that it shouldn't be that the older siblings are translating at parent-teacher conferences for you, because that makes it seem like the hierarchy has been shifted. And it's very important not to let that happen because you still need to be the parents they'll come to for other things, not just school. Just in terms of overall parenting issues, the bottom line is whatever worked in America, or I don't even know if we're all from, because like I said, we didn't do this Hector Ruth in the beginning of the introduction, but assuming many of you are from America or from Western cultures, wherever you're from, right? You had principles of parenting, right? You might not have stated them explicitly, but you had certain rules. If you're not allowed to spit, you're not allowed to hit, you're not allowed to rip things that other people do, right? You're not allowed to write on the walls. You have to wake up in the morning and go to school. You have to do your homework. There are certain rules that parents have, and often when people come to a foreign country, especially Olim coming to Israel, there's guilt. We feel kind of bad that we brought them here. We feel kind of bad that they have to struggle with Hebrew. We feel kind of bad that they're not with their cousins. There's a lot to feel kind of bad about. You have to feel good at the end of the day. As Rat Hashem, when you see your kids, and some of those of you that know me know that my second son is now in the army, and unfortunately, all his ceremonies have been on Zoom because not Zoom. They've been on the Facebook of the Shiryon because you can't go. But when you go to those army ceremonies and you see your kid is well integrated in Israeli society, it is happy, it is healthy, it is proud to be here and wants to serve our country. There's no greater pride. I'm getting a chill as I say this, but that's the success. Or you see your kid is in university, your kid is in a midrash, whatever they're doing, right? When you finish this process and you see that they've turned into well-adjusted people that are proud to be living here, you'll realize that it was all worth it at the end. Oh, why am I telling you this? Oh, this is what I'm saying in terms of your parenting. You don't have to feel so much guilt. It's going to be hard in the beginning, but at the end of the day, your kids are better off that you live here. And that's, I assume, why you came, right? One of the reasons is that you believe that this is the right place to raise your children. So don't let that guilt overwhelm your better sense as a parent, right? If you know that your kid is not supposed to hit their siblings or spit, you should punish them or respond or have the consequences that you would have even if you were living in Phoenix or even if you were living in Cleveland. That shouldn't change. And saying, oh, he's going through such a hard time. Okay, so maybe you want to speak to him or slightly change things, but overall you need the same rules as you had there because children need rules, they need structure, they need boundaries, especially when all the boundaries have been broken and you move to a new country. So please don't abandon whatever worked for you there. It'll work for you here also. You may need to tweak it slightly. And another point that I want to make is about safety. And then we're going to get back to the school issue, but I just think this is so important to emphasize. A lot of people have this naive misconception that everyone in Israel is Jewish, and everyone in Israel is good, and everyone in Israel is a big tzaddik that will never do anything to harm my child. Unfortunately, after working my job for many years, I can tell you straight out that that's not the case. Unfortunately, there is a lot of abuse that happens here. I'm sure it happens in America as well. I haven't been there for many years, so I can't tell you, but there have been a number of cases in all the neighborhoods of Beit Shemesh, or not Beit Shemesh, in the Chiloni system, in the Dati system, and in the Haredi system. And I think that one of the major reasons amongst boys happening to girls, things happening to boys, you need to watch your children just like you would in America. A lot of people, like I said, they have this naive misconception. Okay, in America, I would never let my kid walk 3 blocks by themselves in the dark. But in Israel, I have no problem letting them walk from neighborhood A to neighborhood B, which is a 20-minute walk on some streets that are somewhat deserted in the dark because it's Israel, right? Everything is safe here. you have to maintain the same safety guidelines as you would anywhere, because I think that one of the reasons why there is not a low prevalence of abuse in Israel is because you have a lot of unsupervised children walking around. It's important to speak to your kids about these things. I know in the schools that I work, like I said, that I didn't say, but I worked in two Haredi girls' schools. We actually have a Muganu program. We have a program to teach kids child abuse prevention. And it's just important to speak to your kids about these things, not say, oh, in Israel, it's much worse than America. I don't believe that it's worse than America, but I'm just saying your kids who in America you would never let do X, Y, and Z, you won't let them walk this distance in the dark or whatever. You should generally have the same rules here. I mean, the main rule is don't have people go by themselves in deserted places. If they're with someone else and it's not a deserted place, that's the most safe. But I just wanted to throw that in because a lot of Olim have this belief that everything in Israel is safe because everyone is Jewish. It doesn't matter how religious someone is. When someone does these things, it's not related to religion. So please maintain your same safety rules, maintain your same discipline rules as you did in America. That doesn't need to change. Okay, just a few more things. How to help your child learn language, right? I'm going to tell you, those of you that let your kids watch movies, and I'm not telling you philosophically, let your kids watch movies, don't let your kids watch movies, but if you're going to, I don't know, whatever mechanism they watch a movie in, it would be much better for them to watch the Hebrew version of the Disney movie than the English version. They might not like it as much, but I remember when we first made Aliyah, the big movies, there were Cars and Mulan. We bought all these movies in Hebrew because if they're watching it, they may as well watch it and learn language as well in an enjoyable way. If they're watching YouTube videos, whatever you can have them watch, Bob the Builder, Fireman Sam, these are all in Hebrew, also on YouTube. So if your kid is watching Bob the Builder anyway, have him watch Bob Habanai. If he's watching Fireman Sam, have him watch Sami Akabai. As much language as they can be exposed to, the better. If you could have with Israelis, that would be the ideal, but it's not always so easy. It's not necessarily the most natural choice, but that's the best that they can become friends with Israelis because they're exposed to language. I actually hired a teenager to hang out with one of my kids, who was then she was a second grade girl. She only had American friends in her class. There were a number of new Olim. I hired this woman. She wasn't a woman. Now she's a woman. Then she was probably 15, 16. I said, just hang out with her. Don't speak. She didn't really speak English. Don't speak in English. Walk around, take her to the supermarket, tell her what things are called, play games with her in Hebrew, expose them as much as you can in Hebrew. I'm not suggesting that you speak to them at home in Hebrew. Sometimes I encounter this specifically with parents, not American parents or Anglo parents, because Anglo parents often feel very comfortable speaking in English and they feel that it's, a world international language and it's important for their kids to learn English. But I've spoken to a number of parents through my work from other countries where Ethiopian, Russian, French, other languages, where they actually will speak to their kids in Hebrew at home, which I don't think is the best idea because they actually don't, these particular individuals that I have in mind actually don't speak Hebrew so well. I don't think you're really helping your kids if you're speaking to them in Hebrew and you yourself don't speak that well. What you can do is read them books in Hebrew. Because if you're teaching them wrong grammatical structures or the wrong way of saying things, I'm not sure if that's super helpful, right? It's better that they learn English well and that they can sort of attach the Hebrew language structures to the English language structures. I won't get into the cognitive psychology of it, but there's a basis to that. Having an alingual child who doesn't speak either language good is the worst in terms of language learning. If they know one language fluently, it's much easier to attach the second language to the mental lexicon with the first language. But what I'm saying is that you should be using Hebrew at home, not speaking it if you don't speak well. I don't think that's helpful. If you speak very well, do it. If you don't speak so well, I don't think it's helpful, but you can read them books in Hebrew. It is so important to buy them Hebrew books and read to them, because if you're reading them a book in Hebrew, especially a vowels book, which most of you should be able to read accurately, they're getting vocabulary, they're getting Habanat HaNikra, they're getting reading comprehension, they're getting a lot of very good skills in Hebrew. There are so many places now that I received WhatsApps of like places that have Hebrew books, 10 for 100 shekel, or like 8 for 100 shekel. A lot of kids' books have these amazing sales because they haven't been able to sell the inventory. Also, the Benjamin Children's Library, those of you that are unfamiliar with it, is in the Meyerhoff Matnas. It's a fantastic library. It's unfortunately closed because of the coronavirus. If you join, if you remember, they have a takeout system now. You could look at their catalog and just write what books you want, but that won't help you so much with the Hebrew books because you don't know what you're looking for. But when it opens, you can go and you can look through the shelves and they have lovely librarians. Naomi Dubitsky works there. I'm sure I'm forgetting names, but they're very nice, helpful librarians there who will be more than happy to give you book recommendations. So read to your kids in Hebrew, encourage them to read in Hebrew. It's very, very helpful. Whatever exposure you can to language would be the best. Should your kids maintain their relationships with their friends from America? People often ask me this. I would say yes. I don't think that it's helpful to just cut off people that you've been friends with. I think your child's overall emotional health is very important. And if you have a friend, that's a valuable asset. You don't want to lose that. But it shouldn't come at the cost of making new friends. You should encourage your kids, of course, to maintain their old relationships, but at the same time, they live here now. Encourage them to make new friends. And you can't only be friends with David from West Orange, you have to make friends with David from Ramat Beit Shemesh, right? You need to expand that to that as well. Okay, and I specified about parents learning Hebrew and how it is so important that parents learn Hebrew. One more thing, and then I'm going to stop and I'll open it for questions. Motivation. There's a researcher named Richard Gardner. When he talks about language learning, he talks about something called integrativeness. He says that obviously part of language learning is cognitive ability, your language processing in your brain. But that's not the only thing that affects whether or not your child is going to succeed in learning language. There's a big factor in language learning, which is emotional. The child feels that it's going to benefit him. If he feels connected to the place that the language is spoken, he's going to want to learn the language more. There's a lot of language research, a man named Genesee, about people learning Canadian as a second language in Canada, learning French as a second language in Canada versus Mexican immigrants. They show that there's a lot of emotional factors that prevent Mexican immigrants from wanting to learn English, including giving up their culture, and they feel that they're betraying their culture, they're betraying their grandparents. There's this idea that if I don't want to learn a language, I'm not going to. Whereas in Canada, there's no penalty, there's no reason not to learn French. And it's very important to impart upon your children this idea that learning Hebrew doesn't mean that you all of a sudden lose your American identity. Until my sons started yeshiva and they weren't living at home, we subscribed to MLB.com. They would watch the games, the baseball games and the condensed games, and they could still follow their same sports. You don't have to give up what you had there. And it's important for your kids to realize that they will always be a combination. They'll be partially American or French, wherever you're from, probably not French, you don't understand it, and partially Hebrew, and that they should want to live here, and that if they hear you insulting Israelis and saying they're so rude, and that cab driver was obnoxious, and the lady in the store, can you believe she did that? These Israelis, they have no if they hear you talking like that, they're not going to want to be like that. And if they're not going to want to be like that, they're not going to learn Hebrew. If they don't learn Hebrew, they won't do well in school, they won't integrate, and they won't want to stay in Israel. If you want that all to happen, it's very important to speak well of Israel, to speak well of Israelis, and to speak well of Israeli culture, and to speak well of the Hebrew language, and to show them that you yourself want to learn it, so that it'll be something which is desirable to them. And if they don't have this sense of integrativeness, which means wanting to integrate, they're not going to learn Hebrew. And a main way of doing this is by you modeling the desire to integrate and going to places that reflect Israeli culture, and you yourself trying to watch things in Hebrew, reading books in Hebrew, because that will motivate them to want to learn the language, which is a very big factor in terms of language learning. Okay, just one very practical thing. I kept on saying reading in Hebrew is important. If your child had any sort of learning issue in America, I assume, based on statistics, it happens that some kids have reading issues.
Sorry, must have pressed remember, we did this once.
But what? Camera, the video's on.
No.
It's very important to be in touch.
This one's locked. No, but there was a bit
in Israel, the resource room is called Hora'ah Metakenem. Here, I will take that down. If I had a blackboard, I would write it on the blackboard. Now this is
No, this is a lock.
Hora'ah Metakenem. It's like Metaken is like remedial, like Metaken. Hora'ah Metakenem. I don't know if you see that backwards, or if you can even read my handwriting. Hora'ah is instruction. You are entitled, if your child has a strong enough learning issue, to get free remedial.
Yeah.
Right? In order to get this, there's a meeting called Va'adat Shiluv. I'm going to write this down also. The reason this isn't relevant now, but I just want you to write this somewhere, so that around Pesach time, if you think your kid needs this, tell the school. A Va'adat Shiluv meeting takes place in the spring. They all end by May 15th. And these are the meetings that determine for the following school year who's eligible to get the help through the city. The school has a certain number of hours, and they divvy it up how they want. They often, their first priority is not American only, because they say they're not doing well because they don't speak Hebrew. But if your child had a learning issue in America, especially if he had evaluation, he's eligible to get this help. And he should get it. Eventually your OPAN is going to end, right? And OPAN is not going to help your child learn how to read. It's going to help them language, but vocabulary. But if you suspect that your child has a learning issue, your child is going to assume it's because he's an OLET and he's not, the school's not going to pick up on it. So I would suggest by March, you be in touch with the school, with the yoetzet, the teacher.
Anche ce n'è about the most.
A child needs professional help. Please, if you could sign them up for a vadat shilu, so they can get the help they're entitled to. In Israel, they're very strict with deadlines. If you can't wake up in the summer, it's it would be good if they got help next year. No, the budget is already divvied up by then. So that just write it down somewhere that by March, if you think your kid is going to need help next year, this year they're not going to get it. It's too late. I don't extra hours floating around. But next year, your child, if they have any help in America, they're going to need this year even more. So please make sure that you are aware of this. The school's not going to tell you about it. They're not going to speak up on it. But if you miss it, about to pay so much money, you're going to need money for other things. They get it sometimes in a group of 3, twice a week, whatever it is. But please keep that in mind. Okay, I think I covered a lot of things. It's very weird that I can't see you I see your names mostly on the screen, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Like I said, this is being recorded and I don't know how to pause it. So as long as you're not just concerned with people knowing that you're asking questions, I don't think too many people, to be honest, watch this on the Facebook page of the Shrut Psychology unless they're your friends who also made Aliyah. But if anyone has any questions, comments, I'm happy to address them or to try to help you with anything you might want to ask. Okay, you're a very quiet group, I see. Okay, so if no one has anything further to say, just like I said, be aware of the Shrut Psychology that we exist. Every school has a psychologist. Beit Israel, I know your kids are definitely in Beit Israel, Orot and Harel. They definitely have psychologists. And to my knowledge, the psychologists in all of those schools, most of them speak English as a native language. So please reach out to them and Hatzlacha. Thank you, everybody. Like I said, I'll stay on another minute if people have questions.
Thank you very much.
I see there are things in the chat. Let's see what the chat is. Oh, yes. Please mute yourselves. It's very hard to hear. Oh, you know what? I didn't hear any of you. It must be that you're all muted because I didn't hear any of you talking. Dave Rash, Bareka, Charla, Asot Mashu. Thank you. Oh, thank you. I appreciate the feedback. It's fun. I wish I could meet you in person. You should. I really enjoy meeting the Nevolim. As I said, some of you I know just because of my kids' class, but hopefully if you see me in the street one day, in better times when we're walking around and say, oh yeah, I heard you give your lecture on Zoom. Let me know how your kid is doing. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.